Hi everyone, my name is Hongwei Bao. I'm a queer author and an academic based in Nottingham, UK. I'm the author of Queering the Asian Diaspora, a non-fiction book about queer Asian diasporic activism in Britain and globally in the past few years, as well as a poetry collection, The Passion of the Rabbi God. Yeah, this book is written for a general audience or general readership, and I try to make the language as clearly as possible, but of course the readers will be the judge. And of course, I hope this book will be of particular relevance to queer Asian communities, because after all, it's about their lives, their struggles, their activism, etc. But I also hope that the general readers, everybody can learn something from the kind of spirit, unyielding spirit of fighting racism, of expressing their own desire and solidarity amongst queer and ethnic minority groups. In the book, I'm advocating intersectional politics. So essentially, whenever we think about politics and activism, we should use an intersectional lens, looking at their intersections and how they converge. For example, when people have an imagination about the Chinese community or Asian community, they probably have a particular image about what Chinese men or women will look like, and this is usually built on senses of Orientalism, exoticism, and desexualization of the Asian men, etc. And when we are talking about LGBT movement, usually we have kind of Western queer imagination, so in which racial and ethnic minorities are marginalized in such an imagination. So essentially, it is not only to pay attention to the existence and lived experiences of the queer Asian community, but also to recognize that all identities are necessarily intersectional, and there's no sexual politics without racial politics, and there's no racial politics without sexual politics. It is the coming together of different types of identities and different forms of social justice that we should attach ourselves to, that we should pay attention to. Oh, there are so many. Of course, I would highly recommend queer authors and Asian authors, for obvious reasons. For example, for poetry, I like the writing of many queer Chinese poets, including the poetry by Ocean Vuong, by Chen Chen and Mary Jane Chan, and all other works deal with Asian identity, not as a kind of static category, but as a constantly mutating category that both resist essentialism and the kind of colonial cooperation. So that I really appreciate. And in terms of novels, recently I've been reading 3 novels and I really enjoy them. Alan Hollinghurst's novel Our Evening is a great story about queer East Asian experience, growing up in the UK and then experiencing the Thatcher era, which I've learned a lot. It's a beautiful story. And Jiaming Tang, who is a New York-based American Chinese author, and his debut novel, Cinema Love, is a beautiful story of Chinese migration from mainland China to New York. And it's not only a story about queer Chinese story, but it's also about the kind of Chinese community's migration experience actually in the US, and what kind of community and racism that they are dealing with. I think it's a very touching novel. And the third novel I would recommend it's actually a short story collection by Yan Ge. It's called Elsewhere. It's a beautifully written, short story collection ranging from Chinese villages to New York, and they are about diaspora identity, they are about gender, sexuality, and desire. So there are a few queer stories in the book, so please check it out. Yeah, another book I'd recommend is a memoir written by Chinese-American author Curtis Chen. Curtis Chen grows up in a Chinese restaurant in the Chinatown of Detroit, And of course, I mean, he attended local schools and he received a lot of racist bullying. And at the same time, he also developed, I mean, his own gender and sexual identity as a queer person, and he also transformed politically, actually, from a Republican to a Democrat. And basically the story is wonderful. It's an inspiring story of queer American Chinese identity and desire. I would highly recommend it. This book has been influenced by many scholars, I mean, especially in the field of queer Asian studies and queer diaspora studies. In queer diaspora studies, for example, Martin Manalance's book on queer Filipino cultures and Gayatri Spivak's book on the queer diaspora, in particular, her theorization of queer diaspora as a subject position to resist nationalist as well as imperialist knowledge regimes are particularly helpful. And also I like Sheng Metzger's book, The Chinese Atlantic. The Chinese Atlantic is a wonderfully written book describing the trajectories of Chinese migration along the Atlantic and the cultural articulations in many different sites. These are wonderful works that I would recommend.